was 50 when I first noticed the silence. Not the good kind. Not the hush of dawn or the stillness after rain. This was the kind that creeps in slowly, like fog rolling into a valley. Quiet enough not to alarm you, heavy enough to change everything. It wasn't the world that got quiet. It was me. At that age, you think you're still climbing. You tell yourself you're in control. You believe you've still got time, and maybe you do. But the kind of time that matters starts to shift its weight. Looking back now, with these hands that shake and eyes that tire faster than they used to, I see it clearly. I made mistakes. Not big, flashy ones. No scandals, no betrayals. Just the kind of quiet choices that drift by unnoticed until one day, they've built a life you didn't mean to live. One of the first mistakes I made at 50 was thinking health was something I could fix later. I didn't feel bad, not really. Sure, I had some stiffness in the mornings, a few extra pounds that didn't go away no matter how many times I promised myself I'd start walking again. My doctor said my cholesterol was climbing. I nodded, smiled politely, and left with a list of suggestions that ended up in a drawer I never opened. I was always too busy. That was the story I told myself. But in truth, I was too distracted. I gave my time to everyone and everything else, thinking my body would wait. Didn't. The cost came slowly. In little aches, skipped stairs, heavier breathing, until the day my granddaughter ran ahead of me in the park, and I couldn't catch up, not even close. I remember stopping to sit on the bench, pretending to admire the trees while I caught my breath. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not my heart, not my bones, but something in between. A realization I had waited too long to take care of the only vessel I had. At 80, you learn to live with the consequences. But I still missed the man I could have been if I had just listened earlier, to my body, to the quiet warnings, to the chance for change. Another thing that still weighs heavy. I stopped saying I love you as often as I should have. You'd think at 50 a man would know better. I thought I was showing love in all the right ways, by working hard, by providing, by being reliable. And maybe I was, but love isn't a utility bill you pay on time. It's not enough to be present if you're emotionally absent. I didn't tell my wife I loved her nearly enough. I assumed she knew. I assumed the way I kissed her forehead when she fell asleep on the couch, or the way I remembered her favorite tea, was enough. And maybe it was for a time. But people forget things they aren't reminded of. And love, even the strongest kind, can become distant when it isn't spoken aloud. There was a night years later when she looked at me across the dinner table and said, "You used to talk to me more." That hurt more than any argument we ever had. Because she was right. Somewhere between the meetings, the bills, the small talk, and the television noise, I stopped really seeing her. And now I sit beside an empty chair most nights, wishing I had told her, just one more time, how deeply I adored her, how she made ordinary days feel like treasure, how the sound of her laugh was my favorite music. Love doesn't need perfect words. It just needs to be said out loud often, and especially when it feels inconvenient. I also remember how hard I clung to things I should have let go of. Grudges, old arguments, wounds that no longer bled, but still ached whenever someone touched the scar. I held resentment like a shield. I thought I was protecting myself. In reality, I was carrying poison. And the older I get, the more I realize forgiveness isn't for the person who hurt you. It's for the one carrying the memory. At 50, I still held on to a falling out with my brother. Something about money, or pride, or both. We stopped talking. I waited for him to apologize. He waited for me to call. Neither of us did. He died at 62. I didn't make it to the funeral. I tell you this not for pity, but for permission to let go of the weights you've been dragging behind you. No one wins when pride becomes your compass. One of the loneliest lessons I learned came from neglecting my friendships. At 50, it's easy to think the people who matter will always be there. You've known them for decades, after all. But friendships, like gardens, need tending. Otherwise, they wilt. I stopped reaching out. Everyone was busy, I told myself. They probably didn't want to be bothered. I convinced myself it was just part of getting older, watching relationships fade, like old photographs in the sun. But now, at 80, I think about Dave. He was the kind of friend who'd bring over coffee just because it was Tuesday. We used to sit on my porch and talk about everything and nothing. Then I got busy. Weeks turned to months. Months turned to years. I found out from someone else that he'd moved away. Then he passed. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly a decade. It's a strange feeling, to grieve someone who was once part of your daily life, and to realize you let the connection slip away for no good reason. So if someone crosses your mind today, call them, or write, or drive over. Don't assume they'll always be there. That's a gamble you'll wish you hadn't made. If you're still here, leave me a comment. Tell me, what's one thing you're holding on to? And what would it feel like to finally let it go? I also made the mistake of chasing productivity over presence. That decade, my 50s, it was the height of my career. People looked to me for answers. I was the one who got things done, who made decisions, who kept it all together. I liked that version of myself, a man with purpose, a man in motion. But looking back now, I realize I wasn't really living. I was just managing. I scheduled everything. I prioritized deadlines over dinner time. I took calls during vacations. I kept a planner so full it could have choked a horse. And I told myself it was just for a season, just a few more years, just until we paid off the mortgage, just until the promotion, just. But what no one tells you is that time doesn't wait for your just. It slips away while you're busy preparing for the future. My daughter turned 16 and I remember being stunned by the thought. I missed it. Not all of it, but enough. Enough that it still haunts me. She used to ask me to come to her art shows, her recitals, her weekend soccer games. I went sometimes. I even clapped. But my mind was always elsewhere. On emails, client problems, some looming next thing. I was there but not really there. Now she has children of her own. I watch her with them, how she puts her phone away when they speak, how she listens with her whole face. And I wonder, did she learn that in spite of me, or because of me? You can't rewind time, but you can sit with the ache of what you missed and let it soften you for what's left. There was also the way I neglected wonder. By 50, life becomes routine, predictable. You stop noticing the way the light hits the kitchen window in the morning. You forget how blue the sky is when it stretches unbroken by thought. You stop asking questions. You stop being surprised. I used to marvel at things. The sound of wind through tall trees. The smell of my wife's shampoo. The way bread rises in the oven. Somewhere along the way I stopped. That's what routine does. It numbs your sense of awe. Convinces you that what's familiar isn't sacred. I remember one afternoon in particular. I was walking past a group of kids blowing bubbles in the park. Big, rainbow-tinted spheres floating toward the sky. One of them pointed and shouted, "Look, that one looks like a planet." The others gasped and ran after it. And I just kept walking. Now, I would have stopped. I would have smiled. I might have even tried to catch one. It's not that I didn't care. It's that I forgot how to. Life was too noisy back then. Too full of obligations and bills and headlines. But the beauty was always there, waiting for me to slow down. If you still have the ability to be amazed, hold on to it. Protect it. Wonder isn't just for children. It's a kind of wisdom, an open door in the mind that says, there's still more to see. Another regret? I waited too long to ask for help. Pride's a tricky thing. It wears 1,000 disguises. Confidence, independence, stoicism, even kindness. I thought asking for help was weakness. I thought I had to be the one holding everyone else up. So I carried my burdens in silence. I didn't talk about the creeping anxiety, the nights I couldn't sleep, the fear I felt when my job started to feel hollow. I smiled. I joked. I made sure no one knew I was unraveling just a little each day. And the irony? When I finally did open up, first to my wife, then to an old friend, they didn't shrink away. They leaned in. They listened. They said things like, "Me too." And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. We live in a culture that praises independence. But connection, real, raw, mutual support is what carries us through. If I had spoken sooner, I might have saved myself years of quiet suffering. So I say this gently. If something inside you is heavy, you don't have to lift it alone. Let me also confess this. I wasted too much time comparing my life to others. At 50, it felt like everyone around me was doing better. Earning more, aging slower, traveling further, laughing louder. I measured my value against their milestones. And every time I came up short, I added a new layer of disappointment to myself. It's poison, that kind of thinking. Quiet, persistent, turns gratitude into scarcity. It teaches you to see what you lack rather than what you have. I remember one night, I had just scrolled through an old friend's vacation photos. Greece, I think, or Italy. Their smiles were perfect. Their children beamed. And I sat in my dark kitchen thinking, why can't that be me? What I didn't know was that friend had just filed for bankruptcy. His marriage was unraveling. Those photos, they were the only thing still holding the illusion together. I wasted so many good moments longing for someone else's life. And now, with what time I have left, I try to practice this one thing. Contentment. Not the flashy kind, the quiet kind. A warm mug in my hands, a breeze through the curtains, the sound of someone I love humming in the next room. That's real wealth. So if you find yourself caught in comparison, step back. The life you're living, flawed, ordinary, yours, is still worth being present for. If you're still here, leave me a comment. Tell me, what's something you've stopped noticing that you'd like to see again with fresh eyes? There's something else I carry, though it took me years to name it. The mistake of ignoring silence when it tried to teach me something. At 50, there were moments, late at night, driving alone, standing in the shower, where a certain stillness would creep in. It wasn't peace. It was more like a whisper I didn't want to hear. A feeling that something in my life was off-kilter. That maybe I had drifted too far from the person I once promised myself I'd become. But I never stopped to listen. I'd fill the silence with noise, emails, errands, television, small talk, anything but stillness. Anything but facing the growing gap between who I was and who I wanted to be. I kept telling myself I was doing what I had to, that dreams were for younger men, that this was life now, predictable, practical, gray. But now, with so much behind me, I realized silence wasn't my enemy. It was my guide. It was the compass I never consulted. And had I sat with it, really sat, I might have seen where I was headed long before I got lost. I would have known I wasn't happy, not miserable, but not whole either, not alive in the way that matters. There's a cost to betraying your own sense of meaning. It doesn't show up in one grand collapse. It shows up quietly, in fatigue you can't explain, in laughter that feels hollow, in moments where your own reflection feels unfamiliar. So I say this with tenderness. If life feels off, don't rush to numb it. Sit in the quiet. Ask the hard questions. The answers might just be waiting in the stillness you've been avoiding. And then, there was the way I clung to certainty like it was salvation. I was so sure of everything at 50. My beliefs, my routines, my judgments. I didn't say it out loud, but I carried this quiet arrogance, thinking I had figured things out, that my worldview was solid, that change was for other people. I didn't listen much, not really. I nodded when others spoke. I offered advice before I heard the full story. I avoided conversations that made me uncomfortable, especially when it came to my own blind spots. And worst of all, I thought being right mattered more than being kind. There was a time my son tried to talk to me about his life, his choices, his path. I interrupted. I corrected. I reminded him of what I thought was better. He didn't finish his sentence, and I didn't ask him to. We didn't talk again for a long while. It took years and one heartbreaking moment for me to realize I had confused love with control. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is listen without fixing. Now, in the evenings when we do talk, I make room. I let him finish. I nod and say things like, "Tell me more," even when I don't fully understand. I've come to believe that curiosity is a form of love. And certainty is a quiet wall we build to protect our pride. Let it soften. Another mistake, one I rarely speak of, was how I dismissed joy that came too easily. There were things I loved that didn't make sense. Playing guitar badly, drawing crooked little sketches in the margins of my notebooks, singing in the car like a fool, watching the same movie over and over again just because it made me feel light. But I let those things fall away. Why? Because they weren't productive. Because they didn't earn money. Because no one clapped. Because I thought joy had to be justified. I replaced play with performance. And in doing so, I starved a part of myself that once knew how to be free. I see it now in my grandchildren, how they spin in circles just because it's fun. How they draw on walls and laugh at their own jokes. And I think, when did we forget how to be that alive? You don't have to be good at something for it to matter. You don't need a reason to smile. You don't have to earn every ounce of joy. Some things are sacred simply because they make you feel weightless. And if I could go back, I'd give myself permission to be foolish more often, to dance badly, to sing loudly, to love things just because they made the day more bearable. I don't regret my career. I don't regret the work I did or the people I helped. But I do regret that I made life so serious, so scheduled, so stiff. Now, when the sun is out, I sit on the porch and hum little songs no one knows. And that is enough. There's also the regret of never learning how to rest. At 50, rest felt like a luxury, or worse, a weakness. I believed rest had to be earned, that it only came after you had proven your worth. So I worked late. I stayed busy. I treated exhaustion like a badge of honor. But the truth is, I wasn't just tired in body. I was tired in soul. The kind of fatigue that doesn't go away with one good night's sleep. What I needed wasn't a vacation. It was a new way of living. I needed to learn how to sit in a chair and just be. To nap in the afternoon without guilt. To say no when my body said enough. To walk slowly, without rushing toward some invisible finish line. Now, my body demands rest in ways I can't ignore, but I've also come to see it as a gift. Not a sign of laziness, but of wisdom. The kind of wisdom that knows energy is sacred, and presence is better than speed. Rest isn't a reward, it's a rhythm. And had I learned that sooner, I might have saved myself years of burnout masked as ambition. There's one more thing I rarely say out loud, because it still stings. I spent too much time trying to be impressive, and not enough time being real. At 50, I was still performing, maybe not on a stage, but in almost every room I walked into. I wanted people to admire me, to see me as capable, composed, respectable. I wore the right clothes, told the right stories, hid the cracks. I knew how to make people laugh. I knew how to look like the man who had it all figured out. And maybe I did from the outside. But inside, I was tired of pretending. There were parts of me I kept locked away. Fears I didn't name, insecurities I didn't share, questions I was too proud to ask. I didn't want anyone to see the unfinished parts of me. I thought that would make me weak. So I built this polished version of myself and forgot how to step out of it. You know what I've learned since? People don't fall in love with perfection. They fall in love with honesty. The most meaningful moments I've had in my later years came not from being admired, but from being seen. Fully, truly, without the armor. A shaky voice, a cracked smile, a hand that reaches out not to offer answers, but to ask for company. I wish I had known that sooner. I might have let more people in. And perhaps the deepest mistake, the one that sits closest to my chest, was how I treated time like it was endless. At 50, you don't feel old. You don't feel young either. You're somewhere in between, in a strange middle ground where your past is too far back to touch, and your future still feels stretchable. I wasted time like I had more of it in reserve. I let days blur together. I said maybe next weekend more times than I can count. I postponed joy. I waited for the right moment to take trips, mend relationships, try new things. And then one day I looked up, and 20 years had passed. Time doesn't announce itself as it slips by. It moves quietly, one unnoticed afternoon at a time. Now, I count things differently. I don't measure my life by years, but by mornings with sunlight on the floor. Conversations that make my chest ache with truth. The scent of rain. The weight of silence shared with someone who understands. You learn, eventually, that the best moments are not the ones you plan for, but the ones you pay attention to. There's something else I regret, and this one cuts deeper than I expected. I spent too little time with old people, while I still had them. At 50, I still had my mother. She wasn't well, but she was still here. I visited when I could, called every few weeks. I told myself it was enough. But now, at 80, I know better. She used to tell me stories, sometimes the same ones again and again. I'd nod politely, half listening. I thought I knew them already. But now that she's gone, I realized there were things I didn't hear, details I brushed past, feelings she tried to share that I never really held space for. There's an urgency in the voice of someone who knows they're running out of time. And I wish I had leaned in more, asked better questions, held her hand longer when she started to forget the day of the week. We think we'll remember people as they were, but memory fades, and all we're left with is the time we gave them, or didn't. If you still have someone older in your life, visit them, listen, write things down, let them repeat themselves, let them feel heard. You won't regret the time you gave, only the time you didn't. There's one last wound I'll speak of here, though it still opens sometimes when I'm alone. I forgot how to be gentle with myself. At 50, I was hard on myself. Every mistake felt like a personal failure. Every shortcoming became an identity. I replayed regrets on a loop. I expected more from myself than I'd ever expect from anyone else. And instead of offering grace, I offered shame. I thought I needed discipline to grow, but what I really needed was compassion. There were things I hadn't healed from, disappointments that still stung, times I lashed out because I was hurting, and I punished myself quietly for years afterward. Now, when I look at photos of myself from back then, tired eyes, strained smile, I want to reach through the frame and say, "You were doing the best you could. That's enough." I didn't know that at the time. I thought self-compassion was weakness, that if I let up, I'd fall apart. But the truth is, we heal faster in kindness than in critique. So if you're carrying guilt, soften. If you failed more than you've succeeded, soften. If you're tired of striving, soften. There's a kind of strength that only lives in gentleness. The kind that says, "I forgive you," and means it. You don't have to earn your rest. You don't have to explain your sadness. You don't have to keep pretending to be okay just to make others comfortable. You're allowed to be unfinished. You're allowed to be messy. You're allowed to be human. And maybe that's what this whole journey has taught me more than anything, that the most courageous thing you can do at any age is to be tender. These mistakes I've shared, they aren't scars I carry with bitterness. They're more like faded ink on pages I've read too many times. Familiar, softened, but still legible enough to whisper truth. I suppose the hardest thing about aging isn't the slowness in your step or the medications lined up like little soldiers on your counter. It's the quiet inventory you take. Looking back on a life full of choices, some right, some not, and knowing that while you can't go back, you can make peace. That's what I'm doing now, each morning when I open the curtains and let the light in. I sit with these regrets, not to punish myself, but to learn how to live the rest of my days more gently. Sometimes I imagine what I'd say to my 50-year-old self if I could sit across from him on this porch, 2 cups of coffee between us. I wouldn't scold him. I wouldn't overwhelm him with warnings. I'd say, "Slow down. Look at your children when they speak. Call your mother back, even if you're tired. Say sorry first, even when you feel right. Eat the peach before it spoils. Take the trip. Dance, even if you think you look silly. Tell your wife she's beautiful when she's folding laundry and doesn't believe you see her anymore. Let people help you. Cry when you need to. And please, for the love of all that's sacred, forgive yourself. You're not failing. You're just human." I think he would listen. Maybe not right away, but the words would stay. And that's all we can hope for, really, that the truth we learn too late becomes someone else's wake-up call. You know, these regrets, they don't torment me. They haunt me, yes, but not with fear, with a kind of softness, a gentle knocking that reminds me to stay awake, even now, because life isn't over until it's over. And even at 80, there are things worth noticing, people worth loving, healing still unfolding. Sometimes I'll be sitting by the window, and I'll hear a bird I can't name. Years ago, I would have ignored it. Too busy, too distracted. Now I listen. That bird has something to say. Maybe not in words, but in presence, in song, in reminder. Everything we rush past in our 50s. The smell of old books, the warmth of someone's hand resting on ours, the crackle of a fire on a cold night. It all comes back around when you're older. It just asks, did you notice me back then? Often the answer is no. But now the answer is yes. Yes, I notice. I notice everything. I notice how quiet the house gets at sunset. I notice how tea tastes different when someone makes it for you. I notice the way my hands tremble not just from age, but from all they've held. And I notice how short life really is, and how long it can feel when you're present. I want you to know something, whoever you are, wherever you are in your own life. It's okay if you've made mistakes. It's okay if you're still carrying them. But it's also okay to lay them down. To say, I didn't know better then, but I do now. There's no shame in beginning again. Not at 30, not at 50, not even at 80. In fact, every morning you wake up with breath in your lungs and warmth in your chest is a morning that whispers. You still have time to love better, to listen deeper, to forgive softer, to live truer. And if there's one last thing I want to leave you with, it's this. You are not alone. No matter how much regret you carry, no matter how lost you feel, there is still someone out there. Maybe a tired old man like me, sitting by a window, hoping you hear these words and believe them. You're still worth loving. You're still allowed to change. You're still needed. So take the walk, make the call, look your partner in the eyes and say the thing you've been holding back. And when the day comes that you look back, because it will come, I hope you do it with less weight than I did, and more wonder. If you'd like to return, you know where to find me. This space doesn't go anywhere. It'll be here, quiet, soft, and waiting, just like the sun that rises, even after the longest night.